the main requirements of the regulation are a prohibition on companies to place on the EU market or export from the EU products which are associated with deforestation or have not been produced in compliance with the regulation of the country of production. There's also a requirement on companies to conduct due diligence on their supply chains to avoid products which have these risks. What we're interested in are the differences for companies which are already subject to the EU timber regulation, and what are the differences between the new EU Deforestation Regulation and the existing EU timber regulation. So I can give a number of those. Firstly, the scope of products for which companies must conduct due diligence within the EU timber regulation has now expanded within the EU Deforestation Regulation. There is an annex with a list of customs codes for those wood-based products which are included within the EU Deforestation Regulation. It includes everything that was in the EU timber regulation, but also adds printed paper, charcoal, seats, and a range of different other products. So those are new to the EU Deforestation Regulation. Both regulations include the basic requirement for certain companies to conduct due diligence. So they must access information about their sources, they must evaluate risks, and they must mitigate those risks. Two key points of difference which are important. Firstly, in the area of access to information, companies must obtain information on not only the common names of the wood species that they're sourcing, but also the scientific names. They must also obtain the geolocation of the plot of land or the plots of land from which the raw materials were harvested, as well as the date and time of harvesting. Those can present some significant challenges for companies according to the nature of their sourcing and the products that they work with. In the area of risk assessment, there are two areas where companies will need to expand their existing risk assessment to meet the new deforestation regulation. Firstly, the scope of legality, or the definition of legality in the EU Deforestation Regulation is a little different to the scope, the definition of legality in the EU Timber Regulation. The new regulation includes human rights protected under international law. It includes anti-corruption laws, as well as, or at least it confirms that labour rights or labour laws are also included. So the risk assessment needs to adapt to include those new categories of law, if you like. And secondly, obviously, the risk assessment needs to include risks of deforestation and forest degradation, as well as just legal harvesting. Actually, it's quite interesting. The approach to certification, verification schemes in the EU Deforestation Regulation is very similar to the EU Timber Regulation. In other words, the regulation recognises that certification or verification schemes can be used as a tool within the due diligence process. They can contribute to the risk assessment or be used as a tool in risk mitigation to help companies have assurance that the products that they're sourcing are deforestation free and have been produced in compliance with the laws of harvesting. I guess the only difference is, well, in both cases, certification schemes are not considered a green lane, so companies, operators will still have to conduct due diligence in relation to those certification schemes. So it is important that operators evaluate certification schemes again in the light of the EU Deforestation Regulation to ensure that, or to understand the extent to which those certification schemes align with the regulatory requirements. And then secondly, I would just add another point, FLEGT licensed timber. As far as the EU Timber Regulation is concerned, FLEGT licensed timber is exempt or exempts operators from conducting due diligence. In the case of the EU Deforestation Regulation, FLEGT licensed timber would meet the legality requirement of the regulation, but does not address the deforestation or forest degradation component. So companies will still have to evaluate FLEGT licensed timber for deforestation, forest degradation. And then finally, there is one more difference. Actually, it's the position of CITES, CITES licensed wood products. Again, in the EU timber regulation, CITES licensed products are exempt from the due diligence requirements. In the case of the EU Deforestation Regulation, there's actually no mention of any kind of exemption for CITES licensed products being traded, so full due diligence would be required in those cases.